Hi everyone, welcome to the Hasura community call for March. I hope you are all healthy and happy and that you can stay in your home. And I'm glad that despite all the world being crazy, that you could join us today in our community call. So let's have a look first at the agenda. As usual, we'll give an update from our side. First, Tanmai will give some product updates, including actions and some RFCs that are in discussion and need your feedback. Then BT will talk about offline first, where we put out some posts and would also be happy to get feedback and your use cases. And finally, Rishi will show the UI for schedule triggers on the console. In the end, we have again a community demo, and I'm very happy about this. Sean will show us how to integrate Guardian with Hasura. As usual, if you have questions, you can ask them in the chat of the call, and other members of the team will try to answer them during the presentations. Otherwise, presenter will take them up in the end.
C'est vraiment de la merde.
Somebody is not muted.
Ah non, mais je prends pas Free, moi. C'est fini, Free. C'est de la merde.
Okay, I muted the person. Yes, Tanmai, if you're ready, you can start. I will stop sharing my screen.
All right. Hi, folks. Let me just quickly set up my screen share. Cool. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 1.2 milestone and what we're going to have there. So on the action side of things, we're looking at three main kind of areas of work that we want to land before we release the 1.2 stable. The first is support for queries. Right now, actions only support mutations. So we'll be adding support for query fields as well. And then you can kind of have custom types that can return, whatever kind of custom data in a custom format that you have. And then, of course, as usual, you'll be able to make relationships to existing kind of objects in the Hasura schema from the return type of your query. So you'll be able to kind of have relationships back and forth there, and that should work as well. The next thing is backend only permission. So you can kind of look at that action that is in progress here for custom query fields, and you can track progress there. The second feature is backend only permissions for roles. This is a slightly nuanced feature, and the idea here is that sometimes when you have mutations that are using Hasura permissions and Hasura validations, what you want to do is make sure that that mutation can actually only be used via your action and not actually be used by the front end directly. So in this case, those mutations will have a, those roles can have a special permission called backend only. That means that even though there is a user role, the permission or the mutation that is accessible for the user role will only be accessible from something like an action or an event trigger or microservice, but not really a front-end application. And on the third side, what we're looking at on the third big thing that we're going to land is we're going to make debugging for action webhooks much easier. So right now, for those of you who've tried actions, you would have noticed that sometimes when the webhook that you have that is handling the action is faulty or goes wrong, by default, Hasura is kind of running in a production kind of mode where it's returning errors that release the least amount of information or logging the least amount of information. And so what we'll be doing here is making that information, especially errors that have happened that are unforeseen, that you don't expect, we'll be making that easier for you to view on GraphQL itself so that you don't have to look at logs and you can basically debug all of your actions from Hasura's console itself, right? So you can try it out from GraphQL. You'll see exactly what errors are happening on your action handler. You don't need to look at logs in the middle or figure out, what request responses failed. So do kind of track the progress there on this particular issue here. There are a bunch of different options that we've been discussing, and we've kind of frozen on a fairly simple, easy way of making this available. All right, the last piece that is very exciting for me personally is that we had, if you remember, and if you've kind of been a part of our community call from from a few months ago. Alexis had and the server team had talked a bit about the schema validation changes that they've done internally inside the in the Hasura server code base. And as we kind of made that large refactor, some aspects of handling metadata and updating metadata got slower. And now we've made a bunch of changes so that the metadata kind of applications and the replace metadata becomes really fast. This might take a little bit of time for it to come to the console, but in terms of, let me show you a pull request here. But for example, when you have, let's say, 1,000 tables that you want to track, and this used to maybe take a little bit of time, this has now become very, very fast. So this went from being upwards of 20 minutes to 8 seconds, which is, I don't know, what is that? 10x, 100x. There we go. More than 100x speed up in being able to handle metadata and metadata changes. So this will take a little bit of time to, so this will, your CI and the CI processes that you have should already be super fast with this. And this will be much easier on the CLI because the CLI will be using replace metadata. The console will take a little bit of time to catch up with this performance improvement. But hopefully by the time we do the next release, which is 1.3, the console should also have those kind of optimizations to be able to speed up any kind of modification or handling of metadata, even on super large tables, or super large databases, 3 supers. Okay, the main thing that that I wanted to talk about today was kind of talking about the RFCs that we have that are up for discussion. And these are going to be kind of get accepted, and it's going to kind of move to the next stage of actual work starting on them pretty soon. So what I've also done is, if you head to the GraphQL engine repo and you go to the issue section, you'll see a pinned issue here, and we'll keep updating the pinned issue with kind of the top RFCs that we want your comments and feedback on. 2 of the RFCs that we kind of covered in the previous call that I'll quickly touch upon right now. One is the multiple roles RFC, and the other is support for kind of support for operations on nested entities or related entities in top level mutations. And I'll cover both of these in a minute before I come to the third RFC, which is new, which we kind of discuss in a little more detail. So the multiple roles RFC is fairly straightforward. The idea is to be able to kind of compose together multiple roles simultaneously. This RFC is out for reads. We'll be putting together another RFC for writes. That is for inserts, updates, and deletes. But for queries, what you should be able to do is put together a series of kind of roles and say, I'm an editor, I'm also a user, I'm also anonymous. I also have all the permissions that an anonymous user has. And then you'll kind of be able to use all 3 of them simultaneously in the queries that you make. The kind of pros and cons and the various different ways of doing it have been discussed in a little bit of detail here in the RFC. So if you go to any RFC, you'll see a preview of the RFC and kind of the different issues that have led to this RFC. So here, for example, is the actual RFC that you can preview. On the other main feature that we've started to spec out and that we'll start working on is being able to handle nested entities inside mutations. So the idea is that if you make a top level mutation, let's say you're acting on a top level object, you're doing an insert, update, or delete. While acting on that top level object, you simultaneously want to be able to act upon related entities as well, right? You might want to link them or unlink them. You might want to update or delete those related child entities, or you might want to update them and stuff like that. So do go over this spec as well. It should cover a lot of your use cases. On both of these RFCs, please do give us your comments on what your use cases are, and whether this would kind of handle your use cases, and if this doesn't work for your use cases, what the workarounds would be, or how we could improve the RFC or how we could improve the spec to make sure that we're able to capture those use cases as well. The third thing that I want to talk about is a feature that I have been very excited about, but is very complex to execute, and which is why we need as much community feedback as possible before we get into this. The high level idea is to basically allow the console to be able to kind of import data models or Postgres functions or constraints, uh, or any kind of any combination of Hasura metadata and Postgres entities, uh, import them uh, directly into the console, so that you can kind of bootstrap whatever you're working on. So the way I imagine this experience working is, let's imagine that you're on the data tab on the console, and what you can do is you have a small search bar, um, and on the main schema page where we today see untracked tables and tracked tables, where we have the option of kind of like browsing a community library. And then as you kind of browse that library, you can search for stuff. So you can say I'm searching for an e-commerce or location, right? Or Trello, right? Let's say you search for a few examples, and then a bunch of examples that other people from the community have contributed around their data models, or maybe a combination of data models and Hasura permissions, right? Especially for, let's say, for example, looking at a collaborative document, right? Like collaborative document editing, or you want a collaborative document kind of schema. And that has very interesting permission rules associated with it as well. And so you might kind of want to import those data models and permissions. And then basically what you can do is click on a button and have that imported into your console, into your current schema immediately. This will of course be applied as a transaction. So you can always go back and roll that back if you want. But that kind of schema and metadata will get applied. And then of course you can iterate on that on the base schema that you've imported and shape that into something that is more relevant, for what you want to do. On the other side, to make it easy to publish models as well, what I would like to do is have the ability of kind of being able to select a few specific entities and then just publish them. And that would kind of maybe create a new GitHub repo and publish that, where I can take that GitHub repo, edit the README a little bit, and then make that available in the community library. This idea, I think, would be particularly useful for when you're starting to put together a few complex features in your schema, right? Like, so let's say, for example, you're modeling like a e-commerce Stripe checkout situation. You're modeling calendar. You're modeling real-time. You want to model recurring events and canceled events and stuff. You want to model a real-time user, like a Uber clone type scenario, or a Trello kind of scenario where you have offline first, or a collaborative document editing is another example, where the combination of modeling and metadata make it fairly interesting, that you might want to just start off with something that's useful rather than kind of just having to think about everything from scratch. I think this idea can also extend to not just data models, but also things like Postgres functions or check constraints, where on the console, for example, we've already done the work where you have frequently used columns. So you have a button and then that shows you frequently used columns. But on, for example, check constraints, where you want to have like simple data validation rules around like text length, or email, or the fact that an integer should be greater than 0, right? Like simple validations like that. If you want to use check constraints or Hasura permissions, whatever you want to use to enforce those validations, having a library of these common constraints and being able to choose them will also, I think, be very useful. The user experience of doing that is a little bit complicated, but kind of most important to even start thinking about that is, what are all of the different use cases that you think this would have been useful to you as you've used Hasura, or as you've been trying Hasura out, that would have been useful to you. Just to kind of add a little more clarity, the way I imagine these modules or like these shareable units, since everything that we're doing on Hasura is declarative anyway, right? Like everything is either Postgres or metadata combinations, right? All of this is basically just metadata. Like these are all declarative files that can be put into a GitHub repo and shared. And in a sense, it's kind of like it's basically looks like a minimal version of a Hasura project, right? So any module would be a combination of migrations, metadata, and it may have all of it or it may have some of it, right? Like you might have a case where you just have metadata. Actually, well, you probably won't have that, but I mean, you might have that if you have just say action definitions, right? You have some common actions around login and sign up that you want to use, or you might have just migrations which contain Postgres data models and stuff like that. So that would be kind of one unit, or one set of things that can be shared. Another way to kind of bootstrap this library and make it available is via the Hasura GitHub repo itself, where we'll basically have, where we can have like kind of a JSON file or a folder inside the Hasura GraphQL engine repo, where people can contribute common check constraints, Postgres function examples of Postgres views, right? Things like that. And those will kind of basically be pulled in by the console so that you can kind of search through them as you're typing something on in the run SQL window, or as you're kind of creating a new computed field, or as you're creating a new check constraint, right? So that's kind of more of a library of common kind of functions or common kind of statements that are stored in the GraphQL engine repo inside Hasura itself, maybe inside a community folder or something like that. So those are kind of the two different ways that that we've been thinking about of how this could be done. But please do kind of reply to this issue with examples of what would have been useful to you, and anything that and any kind of other ideas or similar ideas that you have in this, and that would be very useful. All right. The next thing that I was going to talk about was a small kind of a RFC that we've been putting together for a guide. This is not an RFC for a feature, but an RFC for a guide. And BT will talk about that next, which is a guide on being able to, on working with offline first apps that have real-time sync and best practices for them. So I'm going to pause now. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and we can take them up as we go along in the call. All right.
Thank you, Tanmai. BT, are you ready?
Hey, hi guys. Let me just share my screen. Yeah, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to speak a little bit about offline first apps. Couple of things: what is possible with Hasura today, what are the things pending, and the general direction we are looking at, right? So for those of you who have not worked with offline first before, offline first is a paradigm where you can use an app without internet connectivity. So let me just do a quick demo. Right here, I have a to-do list app. So you can see two browsers. So I'll just go create a to-do here. Yeah, you can see the two of them are synced, right? Let me go offline here using the Chrome DevTools. Okay, I'll just mark this as completed. Here I'll mark this as completed. Now let me go back online. Right, you'll see that the two apps have synced, right? So this app has been built using RxDB. So RxDB is a document store on the browser, and it uses PouchDB underneath. We put together a guide tutorial on how to do this.
Can you call them?
Yeah, so if you go to the Hasura blog, you'll find a tutorial on exactly how this was put together. There's also a general design guide that we have put together. This talks a little bit about what would you do, what are the different conflict resolution approaches. What would you do if you were building this from scratch on the front end, right? As Tanmai spoke, there's a small RFC we're putting together on a larger guide of how to do offline first with Hasura. If you have been using Hasura on the backend and an offline first app, we'd love to get comments on what is it that you're doing. That's it from me.
Thank you, BT. And maybe to add, if you have any use cases or if you want to give feedback, you can always reach out to us on Discord, and we can talk about this. Now, Rishi, are you ready to present?
Hey, hi. Yeah, just give me a minute.
Okay.
Not a minute, just a couple of seconds. Well, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
No.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, should work. You can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can.
Right. Okay. So this demo is going to be about schedule triggers. As most of you all might know that we have schedule triggers in preview sometime. And it also had a UI, but we have thought of sort of restructuring the UI a little bit. So earlier, if you look at the UI now, you wouldn't see the events tab here. So everything has gone into triggers. The triggers has event triggers and schedule triggers. Schedule triggers will have a diagram soon. It's not there yet. So for people who don't know what schedule triggers are a way to run external logic at a particular time. Like it could be at a time in future instantly, or you could also schedule a cron such that the external logic is run at those particular time as per that schedule. Right. So my demo for the demo, I just firstly create a simple schedule trigger called increment. This is my IP address. Yeah, I have a local server running here. And the type is going to be cron for now. Then we also have a type called ad hoc. I'll come to that in a bit. So also this is the cron expression. Currently, I just wanted to run every minute so that we can see the changes in the demo. And you can also build complicated expressions using the cron builder. Right, and the payload, you can send any kind of payload here, key value, and yeah, that's it. I'll just save it. Yeah, so it's been saved. So what this actually does is, let's look at this webhook. This is the increment webhook here, and what this does is it receives the request. It makes a query to Hasura, GraphQL query to Hasura to increment a field in a particular table. So I already have a counter table here which has count value to set to 0. So the increment cron will just keep incrementing it every minute. So what it does is look at the mutation, update counter, where everything count and increment counter by 1. Right, and then it just receives the response, passes the response as JSON, and sends an error if there's an error, otherwise sends a success. And this is like the normal exception handling. So if we go back now to graphical, I'm just going to start a subscription to this, and we should see this change soon. Very, very soon. So the events are picked up every minute. So because of which, and also the cron that we had set up was to go and increment the counter table each minute. Yeah, it has been incremented. So it will keep incrementing each minute. Let's go and look at other things for now. So next, let's look at an ad hoc trigger. We'll call it reset. The same thing, except this is reset, and I'll call it ad hoc. The payload key value, and I'll create this. So the ad hoc trigger has been created. The idea about ad hoc triggers is that you configure Hasura with a particular trigger, and then you can invoke it whenever you want. So this is a good use case for sending a welcome email. Like you'll configure the welcome email payload here, and whenever a user signs up, you can just invoke it. So we'll invoke this now. So it has been invoked. So events are picked up every minute. So in a minute or so, we'll have the counter reset. Currently it's 2. It'll become 0 in a bit. So until this happens, I'll just give you a bit some more updates about the console. So we have recently started using TypeScript in the console, and it's been quite nice. So how we are doing it is we are introducing it incrementally. That not the entire code base goes into TypeScript right away. We have some parts of the code base which we have started writing in TypeScript. For example, this schedule trigger stuff, it's written in TypeScript. Yeah, you see. So the reset schedule trigger, reset the counter to 0. Yeah, so schedule triggers can be used to run different kind of async logic at different point of times. So yeah, give it a, this will be in preview by the end of this week. Give it a try and let us know what you think. That's it.
Thank you, Rishi. So now it would be time for our community demo, but I can't see Sean. Is he maybe here under a different name? No.
No, I think
So,
I tried to get in touch with Sean as well. I'm not sure if he's. I hope he's okay, because I don't know what the situation right now is with I think he's based out of San Francisco. But we can check that out. I'm sorry to interrupt the thank you slide. But also just Kevin had a question on the UUID primary keys, which is a common pattern with Postgres modeling, and an issue that Kevin had linked to. So Kevin, I replied on chat, but I think I think mainly if you could help us just kind of iron out like the spec and the way it should work, and like what the different behaviors would be, like whether it would break something or not break something, and for people that would, for those who opt into that UUID to ID conversion, if it would break something for them, how to handle it. So as once we kind of have clarity on that spec, it should be super fast for us to actually go ahead and do. The only problem is kind of just working out the various things that are associated with it. So if you could help kind of put that together on the issue, that would and basically kind of take us like 80 to 90% towards a RFC, we should be able to get tracking on it pretty fast. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Tanmai. Okay, then in this case, thank you so much for joining the community call. Thank you to my colleagues for presenting. And as usual, we always want to make the community calls better. So if you have 1 minute to go to bit.ly/communitycallfeedback to give us feedback about this call, and also let us know what you want to hear about in the next call, we would be very grateful. And then we can schedule the next calls based on what you would like to see and hear. Also, if you build something cool for Hasura or with Hasura, we would be very happy to see this in our community call too. So if you would go to bit.ly/communitycalldemo and just tell us what you build, and then we can showcase this in one of the future community calls. Then thank you so much for joining today. Stay healthy and safe and happy. And the next community call will be on the 29th of April, and I hope to see you all there. Bye-bye.